I noticed that somebody mentioned the second Los Alamos primer and the roundtable of lab designers, which was a brief talk about it was published in National Security Science, the Los Alamos publication. And in it, one of the lab directors had mentioned a severe doubt that stockpile stewardship would actually continue through the whole 3+2 program. And I was wondering if you could comment on that, particularly with regards to potential issues and a loss of confidence in the inoperable warhead, given the inability to test at full nuclear yield these days.
Who would like to take it?
So I think that the comment that was made was not directly a concern about the loss of the skills of the folks that are in the stewardship program. We're pretty happy with where that is. But there's been a question over the last couple of years whether the country still has the resolve to continue a stewardship program. Will we make the investments that are necessary to do the training of that next generation at this time where, basically in the next 7 years, the folks who had nuclear test experience will retire, and there's basically nothing you can do about that. So there's this question of, are we adequately challenging them? And as the budgets get smaller, it's difficult to provide the training opportunities and the challenges to those designers to see that they've been up against Mother Nature and know how to cope with that. But now for the IW stuff, I think, Charlie, you should.
Yes, if I understood the question correctly, I guess, I think it's very important to point out that when we undertake these life extension programs, there's requirements that we are asked to try to meet. One of the first requirements is not to need additional nuclear testing. We would not bring forward a design that required testing. We bring forward designs that we have confidence could be done. Now, it doesn't say maybe they have to give up, maybe some requirements have to be given up on when we do that. But we take that as one of the drivers that we have to have confidence to be able to do this. So right now, when the IW1 or the 7888 is on pause, but before it was paused, the designs that were coming forward, it was generally the consensus of the groups that were working on it that we would come forward with designs of which we would have confidence. And so I don't see now, could things change in the future? As Bob said, if the stewardship program erodes, this underpinning science erodes, things can change. But right now, we took as our #1 mission for that is no additional nuclear testing, meet the requirements which were identified by both the services and NNSA. And so we brought forward designs of which we had confidence would not require additional testing.
Another question? Yes.
Betty Chow with West Tech International. I have more of an engineering question. I understand that the lead designers married with the components from Sandia comes up with a nuclear package. Who ensures that the entire package works? I've heard lead designers do their own experiments. Sandia design the components, and how do you marriage the two? And who's responsible, and what confidence can you give the general public that the entire package will operate as designed?
Yeah, that's a good question, and the answer is somewhat complicated, unfortunately, because it depends on which leg of the triad, and oftentimes even within a leg of the triad, which warhead you're talking about as to who has that ultimate system engineering and integration responsibilities. Sandia has that role at times. Our sister laboratories have that role at times, and the services have that role at times. At the end of the day, there's an organized framework that guides the execution of the large programs that I had on my view graph that has a very formal structure associated with it, that has assigned roles and responsibilities. There is a master plan for those programs that assures that information is collected to demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt that the warhead meets its requirements. And it is overseen by both the Department of Defense and the NNSA. Though all of this work that I'm discussing for the most part is classified, at least within the very large community that has access to that information, this is also all conducted out in the open within that community. We don't each go off and work in our individual labs and just ship things, throw things across the transom, or ship things between each other. This is done in a highly coordinated and very public way within the community. And then there are, on top of that, there are advisory bodies, external advisory bodies within the community who often come in and do their own independent assessments. For example, Admiral Haney, who gave opening comments this morning, he has a large advisory team that at least twice a year sits down with the labs and with the services and does, I can assure you, a very thorough scrub of the underlying basis that we use to pin our statements about confidence in the stockpile and the degree to which these weapons meet their requirements. And then I'd just add that, that's with regard to the large programs. The stockpile that we have today, with the exception of the W76-1, is a stockpile that was created in the 70s and 80s. And all three laboratories and the services have a set of ongoing activities every day, hundreds of people at each institution, that their sole job is to collect information and data, look for gaps in the original qualification basis, and through experimentation and computational simulation, seek to fill those gaps so that our understanding about the weapons as they age continues to increase. And it's that body of knowledge, those activities, that underpin our three lab directors' ability every year to issue a letter, providing their assessment of the safety, security, and reliability of the stockpile.
I think we have time for one more question.
I'd just like to echo, it is very important to understand that there is a pretty formal process, and I think in addition, as was indicated, there is an extensive amount of peer review. By peer, I mean people that work in the field morning, noon, and night, and then what I'll call smart people review, people that are really knowledgeable but maybe don't do this for a living, that come in, and we open ourselves up for that type of review, and that's an essential aspect of this as well, is to make sure that we're not looking under the lamppost. So that's a key part, and it's pretty rigorous and pretty formal that we go through. So there's a lot of reviews and checks and balances that we try to make sure that we're not missing something.
One more question I believe we have time for. Actually, the lady was first, and we'll try to get both in, Greg, so.
I know that in the LANL presentation, there was some discussion on workforce, and I know both Sandia and LANL will be hiring quite significantly across the sort of career demographic of both laboratories. I don't know much about Livermore. Is there any concern from the technical perspective on being able to transfer that knowledge base, understanding that the new workforce will be coming in from the strategic deterrence perspective?
It is true. In fact, Sandia has done a great deal of hiring in the last few years, not for growth at the lab, but as a result of some changes we made in retiree benefits 4 or 5 years ago. We knew in advance what the retirements that would drive, and we began preparing for it so that we could manage this very important workload that we have before us. I would say with regard to hiring, we have right now, as I recall, roughly 30% of our staff have been hired within the last 5 to 7 years. That's a huge turnover at our lab. These are the people who are executing those major programs that I showed earlier, and the reason they're able to do that is because, A, we're still able, although it's harder, we're still able to get outstanding talent from our campuses today. The difference between a manager today and a manager when I was a manager in the early 90s is that in the early 90s I could go to a campus, I could talk to faculty, I could identify the 2 or 3 people out of a department at the PhD level that I thought were just right for us, could bring them back to the lab, we could make an offer, and we'd likely get all of them, all 2 or 3 of them. Today it's much harder. There's a much higher level of competition for that talent. The private sector offers financial incentives that are not accessible to us, and frankly, even if they were, they would be completely inappropriate for federally funded research and development centers. So today, to get 1 or 2 people, you might have to interview or go after 7 or 8. So it's a much harder job, but we're still able to get outstanding talent. And then the second thing that makes it possible is that given the nature of our work, and particularly that work we do for other government agencies, we still have a sizable number of senior employees who have experience in this business. The W76-1 LEP was done in the last decade. There are people like me around who worked on that program who are still able to transfer that knowledge. And we have formal programs in all of these 5 major programs that I indicated that are doing just that, transferring knowledge and training another generation of scientists and engineers to support Stockpile.
Yeah, and I think we started, when this was coming to an end, we started a mentoring program, a leadership program at Sandia. I was up at Los Alamos for a while. There is a sense of responsibility on the part of the leadership that have been around for a while to convey that knowledge. So besides trying to hire the best people, you also try to train them and give them experiences and connect them with the older people in order to get this experience. We could take one more question.
Roger, I'd like to interject.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
So there's a slightly different twist on the hiring for Los Alamos, in particular from the side of the house that I originally came from, which is the physics side, physics design. As was pointed out earlier, during the Manhattan Project, nuclear weapons were at the forefront of science. It was really exciting. There were tons of trained people with specialties in the physics part. Everything was new. Today, that's less true. And as a result, we've had to, on the physics side, institute a graduate level in-house training for the folks that do the weapon physics stuff. It's almost like getting a second master's or second PhD post your college degree in order to fill gaps that no longer are really being filled by the colleges, and going back and doing that. And so that's one particular area. And then I want to make sure we've got enough experimental work that we can evaluate whether those people really learned the lessons that they're being taught. It's one thing to learn from a book. It's another one to actually face the reality. The other place that I'm seeing issues in the recruiting is actually not in the understanding of the weapons per se. There's a drive nationally to go away from subject matter expertise in evaluating safety. Things like criticality safety, safety basis, design safety threats. And the country's schools have not been turning out, I would say, the subject matter expertise that's really required to do that job right, because in the end, that's where it comes down. You can add all kinds of formal processes to be more and more safe, but in the end, somebody has to have the experience to go, this will work, that's a little too risky, and we're having some troubles recruiting there, but we know about it and we just have to pursue that.
So with that, it's time for us to call it to an end. I think our MC is going to talk about a break. I know that there was at least one, maybe several other questions were on break, and so I would just encourage you to meet with our speakers and ask the questions personally. And with that, I'd like to thank the 3 of them for their presentations. Would you join me?